in China now, the only place I know that there might well be others, but the only one I've come across that still produces and uses these in a traditional way for folk religion is in southwestern Yunnan province around Dali, and down and further southwest from Dali as well, right down to the Burmese border. These are still used. So a few years ago, I was in I can't remember the correct pronunciation, Tengchong, which is the last town before you get to Burma. Heading in a particular direction, and it used to be a very important caravan town. Between Burma, it's now been surpassed by Rayleigh, which is down on the right on the southern border with Burma, which is a major trade center now. And Tengchong has been sort of sidelined. All the main roads bypass it now. It's a very interesting old town, and in fact, the British once had a consulate there, had a trade.
Really?
Because they thought they would bring in a major road, and even a railway from Burma was planned to go through the town at one point. Of course, that never happened, and it's now I wouldn't say it's a backwater. It's quite a busy town, but as far as trade's concerned, it's a bit of a centre for amber. It used to be a very important trading town for jade. The situation with jade was that in the until the Qing dynasty, in fact, the major jade centers were in the northwest, in Xinjiang, and it was more for white jade. And green jade wasn't actually very fashionable in China at the time, very pale green. And the dark green that is more sought after nowadays is actually
Burmese, aren't they?
Burma, Actually, near Rockhampton, they quarry it as well.
Oh, really?
Well, it's chrysoprase, but it's a type of jade. And it's that's also, another type. So the dark green jade that's more popular nowadays actually sort of only became popular in China, I believe, during the 18th century, the 17th and 18th century. So it's comparatively recent. And when it did, this town boomed. It was a major trading center, and there's a woodblock printing center in one of the towns there. And that's where, about the reflection. This is the
Baihu.
Baihu,
it's a Baihu.
This is from this town, just outside Chongchong.
It looks amazing.
There's a lot of folk prints from there as well, and they have a lot of they still have a lot of these really quite esoteric deities, and some of the ones I've never come across anywhere else. Like there's a soldier deity, Bingshan, well, actually, I think it's Dao for sword. It has a picture of a soldier on it. So there's some really extraordinary ones, and they modernize some of them. So there's a deity of vehicles, but the image, whereas it might have been for horses and carts originally, of a bus. So they are kept up to speed, and of course they have a massive array. I mean, I bought a collection, a stapled or bound together book of. I visited a studio, and the chap there had just got, say, 300 or 400 prints, bound them in a book, and was selling them. So I actually bought a book. So these are just like the absolute day-to-day collection of these folk prints. And interestingly, because of the Yunnan pronunciation, they don't call them Jima, they call them Jama. Armor.
Home?
Jama. So they, because of the local pronunciation, because that doesn't make any sense in it's no longer paper horse. They call it armored horse. But the character is a sort of random character that's been selected to fit the local pronunciation. But this studio now produces woodblock prints of a flying horse covered in chainmail.
Oh, are you serious?
Because as a sort of joke, he knows the origin, he knows why it's called that, but
Yeah.
because of the local pronunciation, they the paper horse is no longer valid. Yeah,
Oh,
amongst well, locally it's still considered paper horse, but amongst mainstream Putonghua speakers, it comes across as armored horse, so they go, okay, fine, we'll make you a print for that as well.
With the flying horse and chainmail. I noticed you've got a fascination for tigers.
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah. And so do I. And you know, the print that you just showed me, the baihu, has the most distinct wang on its head.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because some of the woodblock prints, the wang is broken, or the lines are so close that you can't actually see the distinctive wang. But that print really shows the particular wang. It's insane. Like, it's so clear. Because some of the other woodblock prints, I think the ones that I think I've got, it is very clear, isn't it? The wang.
Yeah. So
there we go. There he is.
Yeah, right in the middle.
Yeah, right in the middle one.
And these swirls are always there as well on the body of the type. What's interesting about that print for me is that in Eastern China they portray baihu and most tiger spirits, most animal spirits, in fact, as human beings.
Yeah,
they're not portrayed as the animal. And but in Yunnan, the prints are always of the tiger in this sort of fierce tiger descends mountain posture, where it's at an angle looking back up its body. A dynamic pose. But also there was a lot of confusion when I was asking people, so white tiger is quite a powerful, almost destructive force. Why do you use it? And there's the usual thing that in the springtime, when you wake from hibernation, the roars of the tiger is said. So I said, but do you worship the tiger? Or is this, is it are you actually using these dharma as because you, so to speak, the tiger is being thanked, or is it because you just want to keep him on side? And depending on who I ask, I got different replies.
Really?
So it's either because they, are making an offering to the tiger, as it were, or it's quite the opposite. It's to actually
appease the tiger,
protect against him almost.
Right.
Or at least his effects. So I still couldn't work out. But in Eastern China, it seems though a lot of the animal deities are more or less depicted as humans, or sometimes very human. Foxes, the fox deities are not, as in Japan, they're actually sculpted.
Oh yes, kitsune. Kitsune.
Whereas in China, they're just as
humans.
They're just people, and this is. It is. I believe there are still a few fox shrines extant in China.
Right.
But it's very hard to know what they are, because they're not obviously of foxes. They're just of people.
Yeah. Because are you talking about the fox with the 9 tails? Is that?
Yeah. So that's from the Shanghai Jing. Yeah. So the fox with 9 tails gets an extra tail for every 100 years. I think that it affects itself. But you don't really see that in.
It's not very much, and it's not very much venerated or worshipped as well. In the Taoist pantheon, they are featured as a female. So obviously the fox is vixen, it's female with 9 tails. Some of them, the folk religion, some of them do pray to the fox with 9 tails, but for not the right reasons, if that makes sense. So it might be to tame a lover or to gain a lover, that sort of thing. So it's not about protection, or it's more a left wing side of in terms of the deities. So it's not very popular, I would say. Recently it's come back. I've noticed a lot of foxes with 9 tails deity statues up for sale and things like that. But that, you know, that being said, no Taoist temples would actually be displaying them.
I think it's very much a folklore and folk stories as well. You know, like the as you said, sort of, it's not exactly pornography, but it's very, very sort of mild, you know, romantic stories about the foxes, and that's where they're depicted as nine tails. And certainly in the Chinese art, I don't think I've ever seen a fox as an animal depicted in traditional Chinese art. It's, you know, you see them in Japanese woodblock prints.
Yes, for kitsune, and in Korea as well.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Yeah, so they're really quite big in Korea as well, about granting wishes and things like that. But then again, like we said, it's not venerated in the temple. It's more the folk arm of religion. Well,
both the in this collection of in this paper horse collection that I've got, there are two. There's the male and the female, but they both use completely generic woodblock prints. So as I discuss in the introduction to this book, there's if you're a woodblock carver, it obviously takes time to carve an individual woodblock for a deity, and as you know, there are quite literally thousands of Chinese deities. So and they vary a lot from region to region. So we're talking about China as a whole. It was clear that in Beijing there were, at the time, there were deities that were not native Beijing deities, or not native to even northern China as such, that are included in this. So you must also assume there must have been quite large populations of outsiders living in Beijing. But anyway, getting back to carving these things, it takes time and effort to carve these blocks.
I can imagine.
You have to think about storage. How on earth do you store like 1,000 wood blocks in a printing studio? You know, you have to. So a lot of these, a lot of the wood blocks, although there are some blocks which are very specific, you know, they are prints of only this one god. You couldn't use it for anything else. There are also a lot of deities which are depicted by just generic military gods, and the nameplate is left blank. And the studio would either carve a small piece of wood with the name on it and set it into the blank, or they would possibly just carve a separate stamp for a deity and get a lot of these blank woodblock prints and just print them. So the foxes are actually not specific prints; they are just general deity prints. The male one is a military deity, just generic deity, but if they've just stamped male fox. And the female is actually, if it didn't have that name on it, it would have been
just another deity.
One of the deities of childhood that the 9 female deities of children, which include the smallpox gods, of course. So they just would have stamped that on it. Utterly generic. So, I mean, in Yunnan, when I was watching the carvers actually carve these blocks, they're very much cruder and smaller. And he was talking to me, and he had a chisel in one hand, or a woodblock in the other. And as he was talking, he was just like
carving,
just occasionally looking at what he was doing.
No,
he was so skilled. His hand, the muscles here from holding the
I can
chisel.
imagine.
You know, his thumb was sort of bent up like that, but he had huge muscles here. So he's just like carving away, just chatting to me as he was. He's very very skilled man, and there was no need for these incredibly fine lines, which obviously do take a bit of effort and precision to cut.
Well, this particular paper horses, it's, how many years would you have said, would you say that you've invested in this whole collection and books and trying to get behind all the information? And
well, I suppose I can't really say that I've been really aware of the complexity of folk religion in China for more than, I mean, I obviously, just a very brief background. I've been going to China since 1985. Just then I was just as a tourist, just because I was so curious about the country. It had just opened up tourism. But then from 1995 until 2016, so for was that 30 years? God. I was 20 years. I was researching guidebooks on China. So I was traveling around.
Yeah, I noticed the guidebooks that you've written too.
So although I've spent actually over 5 years in total in China, the longest period I've actually spent there was about 8 months in one go. And I, because of the nature of my job, I had to, obviously China is a gigantic country.
Oh, yes.
And though I was writing with other authors, so I wasn't trying to write a book about the whole of China. And if you like, my region of China was generally the Southwest. That's my area of expertise. Sichuan, Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangxi. But I have at one time or another traveled just about everywhere in China. But the nature of my job is I was in the country maybe for 6 months. I had to arrive at a place, identify what there was to see and do there, research it in enough detail that I could tell people why they were going there, and then I had to move. You know, so I was very rarely ever in one place for longer than a couple of days. And so my knowledge of China, although I do have areas of interest where I know a lot more about things, but you know, I have a very broad knowledge of China and Chinese topics and Chinese culture, but my knowledge is fairly superficial for most of that. You know, obviously it's better than somebody who's never been to China or doesn't have any much knowledge of China. Obviously, over 20, 30 years, I've accumulated a fair amount of information, but I'm not a specialist. I'm very much a China generalist. And though I do have particular areas of interest. So it's only fairly recently that I've been delving into Chinese folk religion and the specifics of Chinese deities. And I got hold of this album. I only actually got hold of less than a year ago. It's October last year. When I actually first got it. And I started doing research, and my original interest in it was partly the deities, but more to the point, it was a very big collection of them. I'd seen I'd seen these individual Dharma before, these older ones, but I'd never seen a collection of them. So I was very interested in purchasing it. So I did, and then I started researching it, and I found there were others absolutely identical to this in other places, like in the Ontario Museum in Toronto. They have an identical collection. Now, there's 80 prints in this collection. So the chance that out of a choice of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 gods, that two people are going to put together two identical sets is zero. You know, it's not going to happen. And all these prints were numbered, like with it given a sticker that had been added to them later. One to 80. So I did some research. Actually, since I put out the first edition of this book, I've found I've had some very definitive research. I found the absolute origin of this book, this collection. They're from Beijing originally. They would have been sold in 100 god packets. What seems to have happened, because I found in another collection another identical set to this, except there are 93 prints in total, but only 80 Dharma, and the others are mentioned. And they're much bigger, they're fully coloured, they're proper woodblock, multicoloured woodblock prints. They're much higher quality, much larger, and they're all made in Yangluqing, in just outside of Tianjin in southeast of Beijing, which was Yangluqing was a very famous woodblock printing centre. So these Dharma were made in Beijing itself, at some anonymous studio in Beijing. There were, during the 19th century, there would have been probably in Beijing dozens, if not hundreds, of studios making these. But the Yangluqing studios, they have very, very definite style. It was a village of people who produced these woodblock prints. They have a very, very distinct style. They tend to be very large and coloured. And these extra 13 prints that were added on were were sort of included as a separate set within this. So what seems to have happened is that in the 1940s, there was a man in Shanghai called Peter Neumann, and he was a Jewish refugee from Germany who arrived in Shanghai in 1939, and he left around 1949. So he was in Shanghai for 10 years. Yeah, and he ran a business called the Yellow Hall, which basically supplied rare Chinese, or not necessarily rare, but Chinese books to institutions in the United States primarily, and some in the UK. So museums, libraries, and so forth that were interested in acquiring specific unusual and rare books. And one of the other things he did, he seems to have bought up collections of these woodblock prints, these 100 god prints, and packets of these mention. And then he put covers on them. He published them in 2 editions, one with a sort of nice silk bound cover, and one just in paper covers. He sold them as sets. So he numbered the prints 1 to 93, and he sold them in sets. And the coloured prints, the larger ones, the 13, if you like, extra prints of mention, were folded up and put in the back. So the Royal Ontario Museum's collection and mine only have the jar. So possibly they were originally sold as 93, but the other ones have gone missing. Also, because they're bright and colourful, if you wanted to sell prints from your collection, they would be very desirable. Whereas these are, scruffy and interested to a specialist, but not really of great. Nowadays,
I know you mean.
At the time, wouldn't have been. So anyway, these were assembled at Shanghai, in fact, in the 1940s, and sold as collections with a little booklet, which I've also managed to get hold of a copy of. So like a 2-page brochure, a 3-page brochure that indexed all the prints.
Of them,
and named them as well, but didn't give any information about the background to them at all. So I've done so in a way, I'm republishing this book that was first released in the 1940s. I didn't realize I was doing this at the time, and researched the histories of the deities in order to teach myself more about them. To inform my wider interest in Chinese woodblock printing, which I have been interested actually since my teens. So that's a long time ago. 40 years. Don't you say it. 40 years ago. I made my first woodblock prints 40 years ago. So so I've been interested in these things for a long time. But
with this particular book, you've opened a can of worms now.
So the research that's in this book, I wrote this book over a period of about 3 months, and that involved me going back over my library of Chinese and English books, collections of prints, and trying to identify the deities, and of course talking to Ronnie quite a lot, and along the way meeting people like yourself and James, Jim, who've given me a lot of information as well, and I'm still, like, just in the last few weeks, Jim McCallahan in Taiwan has also put me on to
Jim, he's really good.
Exactly. So I wasn't researching the monkey deity, I was actually researching
he's huge on the monkey deity.
Well, I was looking into cattle and horse deities, and he put some very interesting papers my way. So I've just in the last couple of weeks, in fact, incorporated more information into this book as a result of that. So I'm still learning very much, and the first well, I think inevitably everybody is, even if you're born and bred in Beijing and are familiar with these, you would still have a lot of research to do to write comprehensive information.
It's no end.
So many of the deities are just not around anymore. I mean, everybody knows about the kitchen god and Tudi, the earth god, and Chen Wang, the city gods. But when you start moving away from those, it just
Yeah.
like the people will know about some, some of them. They'll go, oh yes, yeah, God of fire, God of rain, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you actually ask them for information, they go, well, I don't know, I
It
have to
stops
ask
there.
my grandfather,
Oh, yes.
talk to my
Yeah,
grandparents about that. So this really is, it's only, but it's not even like, you can, I know the communists get a lot of blame for the erosion of traditional culture in China, but actually it was way back in the 1920s that the nationalist government in 1928 first prescribed, actually, banned the worship of these gods, and actually published I quote this here, that they, put out a statement saying that the temples, all these deities should be abolished, and the temples should be razed to the ground, and the idols destroyed.